Alrighty, I believe we are ready to get started. Thank you everyone for joining. We welcome questions, so make sure to use the Q&A button and we will be answering all questions at the end. However, if we do not answer your question, someone will follow up with you promptly. Thank you all for your patience, and I am happy to announce your amazing hosts today, Taylor St. Clair and Chrissy Davis. You are in great hands, and with all that said, I will go ahead and hand it over to Taylor.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We are HR partners, and today we're looking to go ahead and go over data privacy and record keeping with you. So we're going to touch a lot of different topics, just things that we've come across, being a pillar of the industry. And we just wanted to kind of give back and let you know, hey, this is what we're seeing, and don't fall into these pitfalls yourself. And we always aim to keep you informed. You can always reach out to us with any questions that you may have, because this is the kind of things that we do on a daily basis here at HR Partners. So we'll go ahead and get started here. So essentially, we're going to go over, as I mentioned, some best practices. We're going to go over personally identifiable information, which is going to be PII going forward, encryption, time frame for retaining documents, personnel files, I-9 terminations, and general documentation rules as well. So we're going to touch a lot of different topics today, but just to kind of let you know. So again, starting at the top, we have personally identifiable information. So this could be any information that you would use in order to assume someone's identity, anything that could be used against a person if someone had this in their hands. So the definition is very broad, but essentially it breaks down to, your social security number, your date of birth, your banking information, address, phone number, health records, etc. And so this is the information that, our employees trust us with. And so we want to make sure that we take all the correct steps to make sure that it is protected correctly. And so the best practice is going to be define this for your company. So when we step aside and we actually define this, then we know that, hey, these are the things that we're paying attention to most. Let's make sure that this information is being kept safe. And so, of course, with that, we want to only request information if it is necessary. There is no reason for you to be responsible for someone's social security number when it has not reached the point of necessity. Because at that point, essentially the less information that you collect, the less that you are also responsible for. And so with this protected information, once we've defined it, we want to decide who also will have access. We want to screen those employees, make sure that these are the correct people, that it is necessary for them to perform their job. Not just because you're, high up or a certain tier, that doesn't mean that you're, necessarily need anyone's date of birth during your actual job duties. So important to remember that portion of it as well. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we're offering training and setting expectations, and that it all just goes back with that emphasis of importance. It's huge to make sure this information is protected because, if there were to be a breach, you would have to alert everyone who is affected. So it's not necessarily something that you can just sweep under the rug. I think we've all, seen these items come up on the radar with different credit bureaus, with large companies as well, where hey, it gets out in the news because that's the way that it happens. And so again, we don't want to be responsible for any of this information unless we deem it actually necessary. And then once we do have it, we want to make sure that the right people are handling it and in the correct manner. And so a good way to do that is, of course, to, talk with your IT company and make it known that safety, security, and protection are priority. There are many different options that, you can take and you can look at it from many different points of view, but the main thing is to make this a priority, because it is in protecting, your business as well as protecting your employees. And, your internal emails should certainly be encrypted because we're going to be sharing, amongst each other. And there are many, many options for encryption services to send outside of your company as well. So, safe searches, firewalls, there's so many things that you can discuss with your IT company. So it's important just to, sit down and really, really have that talk, and make sure that they understand that it's a priority. And I'm sure that they will bring many solutions to the table for you because the encrypted emails are huge and certainly allow us to go about our daily jobs, but add that level of security because sending that PII over just a regular email is definitely not recommended this day and age. All right, and then from there, it's up to you. It's important to know that this is a responsibility that there's high stakes here, and so if you're asking them to provide personal, identifiable information, then you can send them an encrypted email to request that information to which they can respond. So it works both ways. There are options for like password protecting a PDF, um, as well. So just depending on kind of what documents that you're using. But it's important to remember that IT can set these up, but if you don't use them, then there's kind of, we got to make sure that we're actually following up and that this is part of our processes, this is part of our protocol, and that this is something taken seriously every hour of the day. Um, and all of this is because, there are phishing scams out there. There are people who developed a lot of talents during the pandemic, but in many cases, some of these talents were how to take advantage of people, and with everything going online and items like that with the pandemic, people got smarter. So it's certainly important to remember that these things can happen, but there's a couple of main things that we see happen for sure that is common phishing scams. There's going to be some, of course, that are specific to your industry, but never ever change someone's direct deposit information because you received an email request. We want to talk to that person over the phone. We want to make sure that the email that it's coming from is the email that we have associated with that person. We want to, and always look at the domain name. And, if it's a mile long, does it make sense? Is it actually associated with the company, with the person? So it's important to make sure that anytime information is requested that we reach out directly and make sure that they confirm that it is them. Generally, we'll make a phone call and ask some questions to make sure that we're speaking to the correct person. And, and in all cases, we want them to change this information. So you should be able to do that, in your secure portal and things like that. So anytime that it handles any kind of sensitive information like that, we would like it, there's no need for us to even be involved if we don't have to be. And it's important to remember that with calls too, if someone calls in and they just ask, a small thing and you get, just like, oh yeah, what year were they born? It seems like it's something small, seems like it's something that, wouldn't be too much to give away. But that could literally just be the one piece of information they need, and they already have everything else. They already have the last four of their social. They already have, the month and date of their birthday. So we also just want to make sure that there's a reason to giving out any information, because again, it all comes down to necessity, and verification. You know, with these phishing scams, we never want to click on links. We want to report it and delete it. And IT can, of course, help you with these as well. And again, you know, there's a lot of industry specific ones. If there's anything, or any that you have, feel free to add them to the Q&A, because, you know, it's important. The more that we get these out there, the more that everyone else is aware. And we might have some similar industries here joining the webinar today. So just be nice to kind of cover those and build that awareness around it.
So how long do you retain the documents? There's a lot of documents pertaining to personnel and personnel management files. And so we're going to go through that as well and go into the different document types and how long you actually retain each one. So as far as HR documents, let's start with the I-9. You save it 3 years after the date of hire or 1 year after the date employment ends, whichever is later. So with that being said, it's best to go ahead and, you know, put it in as part of your process. Once a year, you're going through and reviewing your I-9s to make sure that you are following the proper retention for I-9s. A lot of people take them, save them, and forget about them. But you do need to go back and properly make sure that you are retaining them according to the documents for the I-9. As far as HR policies, we're looking at handbooks and any additional policies that you may have. Maybe you've done addendums to your handbook, but you haven't quite fully redone your handbook and you added it to it. So with those policies, you need to keep them current plus 3 years. So it's best that you do have documentation and filing, that you have those handbooks in there. And current plus 3 years. That way, in case something happens and you have to go back and do any historical data research on your handbooks, you want to make sure that you do have that information available to you so that you can go back and reference it. For your forms 5500, you need to keep those 6 years. It seems like a long time, but you do need to keep them 6 years so that you do have that available to you. Your OSHA 300 and 300A, so you need to keep them from posting date plus 5 years. So, you know, as soon as you post it, you know, a lot of times you might want to rip it down and throw it away, but make sure that you put it back into the file and keep it for that additional 5 years. Your EEO-1 reports, you keep those permanently. You want to make sure those are part of your permanent files going forward. You know, and there's so many different dates going on. When in doubt, if you're seeing conflicting information, it's best to go ahead and go with the longest time frame. That way, you know you're definitely protected. You can see that the numbers are all over the place. It's a lot to keep track of. There are documents out there, and matter of fact, we do have those documents for you. If you want to reach out to us, we can provide them that can assist you in letting you know what the retention is on all of these forms. So we're going to continue. Litigation documents and investigations. With those, it's dependent upon general counsel recommendations. So if you find yourself in your company in an investigation, or if you're going under litigation, and you've hired general counsel, they will let you know how long you need to hold on to your documents. And the pertinent files based on that litigation or investigations, they must be put on hold. And what being put on hold means is essentially that they are not destroyed and they must be kept until they are no longer needed for litigation. Of course, you would want to follow the recommendations of counsel when a hold is released, so that you can, you know, they'll let you know, hey, the hold has been released, but you really need to hang on to them for this amount of time. And this is also pertaining to third parties who may have the documentation that could be pertinent to a litigation or investigation. So when documents are being put on hold, you will need to contact those third parties as well and let them know that those documents need to be put on hold also, so that you can make sure that you are fully protected. And so that can be difficult because you're used to maybe managing your files, but now you have to worry about a third company as well and putting those documents on hold. Hiring documents. So most hiring documents must be retained 3 years after termination, after an employee terminates. So as we say most, there's always the exceptions to that rule. One of those is a non-disclosure agreement. You would keep that 5 years after a termination date for the employee. And a separation agreement is also 5 years after termination. And those documents, a lot of times you find that, especially that separation agreement, you may be referencing that, especially if there's an unemployment claim. So those particular documents are ones that you would be referencing and going back to. And moving on with this as well, we also have medical documents. And with those medical documents, we have election forms from the employees when they elected benefits during open enrollment or during new hire enrollment. We also have beneficiary forms as well. And both of those would be through the employee's termination plus 3 years. So what that also means, if you have an employee that's been with you 10 years, you have to keep those forms active and available during their employment, and then keep them 3 years past that. And the interesting thing is you have medical records and bloodborne and toxic exposure records. Those are actually termination plus 30 years. Yes, I know it is a big number. You're like, why would I keep it 30 years? But that information needs to be kept that long in case anything comes up, especially that exposure document. You never know if something may come up later if somebody's been exposed, because it's not always readily apparent when they're going through any medical issues that maybe it goes back. So you'll have to figure out a way to make sure that you do keep those files protected from termination of employment plus 30 years. And then you also have payroll files. Most of those can be retained for 4 years after the fourth quarter of that particular year. So you do want to make sure that you do have those retained and saved, just in case you need to go back. There's different reasons why you may need to go back for payroll files. A lot of times people do have payroll systems that they can keep their information in. But you may also have hard copies as well, but you want to make sure that you do have those 4 years after the fourth quarter of that year. Let's go into what goes into the personnel files. So there's a lot of documents that we touch when we go through hiring and an employee's time during working for you, and then also their termination. So what actually goes into the personnel file? Pre-employment documents, which would be the offer letter, resume, job descriptions, and any of those other pre-employment documents. However, there are some restrictions, and we'll get into those as well. Also, performance appraisals, compensation change documents, disciplinary documents, and rewards as well. And you want to keep track of those because just in case, you say you do a rewards program, you want to keep track of those rewards. Separation documents, exit interviews, separation checklists, resignation letters, and unemployment insurance documents as well. So you do want to keep all of those in the personnel file. Now let's get into what you do not put in that personnel file. You don't put medical information, and that could be FMLA forms, return to work forms, insurance elections, workers' compensation, and COBRA notices. All of that information is related and pertaining to medical. So you do not want to keep that medical information in with the personnel file. Believe it or not, I-9 forms and documentation, those also must be separated into a different file. So you do not put those in the personnel file. Background and credit check information also needs to be separated out. And documents related to investigation or claims. So if you have investigative interviews, complaints that are filed, those also must be separated. And so you must create a separate filing system for each one of these types of records. If they're in hard copy, have each one located in a different locked drawer. If they're electronic, they need to be in different folders. But regardless of the filing method, they must be secure and only accessible by approved management and HR. And I know that sounds like, oh, wow, I got to, all of a sudden I got to go through my personnel files. I've got to separate everything out. And you do. You need to make sure that you are protecting the company as well as protecting your employees' information by keeping everything separated, and you control who has access to those files, because that should not be anything that if somebody's going through a personnel file, they should not be able to see any medical information in there. So let's dive in a little bit into the I-9 and E-Verify. With the I-9, a lot of times, you tell the employee to report on their first day and make sure that they bring that driver's license and social security card. And that, unfortunately, is the wrong thing to do. What you do need to do is let them know that, hey, there's a list of acceptable I-9 documents, and you need to review that list and bring the pertinent documents. So we cannot tell them what to bring, but we can give them that list and make sure that they review the list and they present the proper documents that you need. And if they don't present the right document, make sure you are doing your job to review and let them know, hey, I need the right documentation. You'll also need to record those correct documents. And believe it or not, recording more documents than are necessary on the I-9 can be discriminatory. So you may want to make sure that you only are keeping the documents that you need in order to fulfill the I-9. Perform regular audits to ensure that these are done correctly and in a timely manner. And as we spoke a little bit earlier about the retention of I-9s, that could be also part of that audit that you do once a year to make sure that everything's done correctly. And here again, the retention for it is 1 year after termination or 3 years after the date of hire, whichever is later. And if you retain the I-9 after you can dispose of it, they are still game for inspection errors. So you want to make sure that those are destroyed. And believe it or not, a single error on those I-9s can cost up to $2,500, and there's no maximum penalty. So you really want to make sure that you're doing those regular audits and you are following the proper retention. So what those I-9 and E-Verify does, so E-Verify ensures that the individual is eligible to work in the U.S. And in some cases, you'll need to revisit the I-9 to confirm the paperwork once again if something is expired. The E-Verify is mandated in some states and industries, but it is always used as a best practice. So we file these, all that information with our I-9 so they always stay together. And there are fines associated with knowingly employing someone who is not authorized to work in the U.S. And those can range from $250 to $3,200 per incident. So you always want to make sure that you are following the protocol, that you are not employing somebody who is not authorized to work in the U.S. You want to make sure that you really are following all the rules and regulations for both the I-9 and E-Verify.
And so that is when employees come on. And then, of course, there's, paperwork in between, but then the paperwork at the end is going to be for terminations or just exit from the company in general. And it's important, when we're covering how long to keep this information and following those guidelines, that when it does come time to dispose of these documents, that we're not just throwing them away. You should be shredding these documents. You should have, there are plenty of companies that will provide these services, but we want to make sure that we're actually disposing of these in a proper way. Your IT can help you as well if we're talking about expunging records, from the computer. So always important to keep in mind, just take that extra care as well while you're looking at the years and making sure that we're handling the things on the correct date. When that date arrives, that we're disposing of them correctly as well. So we still want to make sure that all files are kept separate. Because if anything were to happen, this documentation is going to be evidence. And so, and on keeping them separate, we just want these in the employee file. So this can go there once everything's closed out, but we don't want them, everything kind of all together there. An actual document, especially if signed, is better than an email in these cases. Because emails are good for acknowledging discussions and recap and items like that. But when it comes to terminations, we want to make sure that everything is documented very well because, when the employee exits from the company, it seems like that's the end, but there are many, many ways that this could come back. And so keeping these documents in the appropriate place and making sure that we're fully covering everything is ideal and best practice because we want to make sure that when we're preparing these documents, that we're assuming that that a judge could look at this later, that a jury could look at this later, that unemployment insurance could look at this later. So it's important to consider all the ways that this could go. It's important as well to have a witness during the process. So when it comes time to sit down, if we were to, find that it's time to terminate an employee, it's important to have another representative of the company, generally the hiring manager, direct supervisor, and then HR being present will help immensely, just to make sure, and then we, of course, notate afterwards. But it's always just important to make sure that we have that witness. Otherwise, it is 1 versus 1. So always important to remember this and make sure, a lot of termination documents, they have a place for you to sign. However, if you don't sign, it doesn't really change the status. So always nice to get signed, but also at that point, there are a lot of cases where it just simply won't be signed. But having a actual document is better than just sending an email. And then in terminations as well, it's always important to think about, turning off their users in any systems, shutting down their email as soon as possible. This is just important to protect your assets as a company, protect your other employees' information as well, and just ensure that everything can go as smoothly as possible. And then, of course, in general, some letters that you'll need to prove were sent are going to be your COBRA or state continuation notices. We want to make sure that these are sent certified. We send them with read receipts as well. It's important that, if an employee says that they did not receive a COBRA notice, the onus is on the employer at that point to prove that they sent it. And so that's the case in a lot of categories. So it's important just to make sure that we are sending these and we are keeping that proper documentation as well, because you might have to provide it later. And then, of course, just some general documentation rules. We want to make sure that everything is clear. Nothing should be a surprise for the employee whatsoever, So when it comes to that termination, they've probably had a, performance improvement program that they've been going through. We've had some verbal warnings. We've had some written warnings up to this point as well. And making sure that, hey, this is how we can turn this around. So always clarity is going to be big, and that's, my example was with terminations, but this is something to use across the board. And then, of course, objective. When we're documenting things on paper, we want to make sure we're not using words like always or never. We want to make sure that we're saying, hey, on August 13th, this happened around this time, instead of, oh, you never do this. So just want to make sure that our opinions aren't being thrown in as well. Of course, we want our documents to be complete. If the document states that you're going to follow up, follow up. Make sure that you're answering any outstanding questions and cover your bases. You know, if there are questions, go ahead and answer that question in an email and make sure it's there because, you know, it's always, you know, everything that we have. If we weren't clear on a document, let's clear it up, but let's do it, you know, essentially on paper or with a witness just to make sure that all of our bases are covered. Consistent and fair are going to be big ones as well, because we want to make sure that once we're being, you know, we're being clear, we're being objective, but we also want to make sure we're applying discipline to one person in the same way that we have in the past and the same way that we will going forward, no matter the job title, no matter the type of person with whom we're working. These are going to be cases, again, you know, discrimination claims could come later. The EEOC, you know, starts from the first time that you speak to a prospective employee and even beyond termination in these cases, in some cases. And so always just important to keep these items in the back of our mind. And so just to recap, you know, if anything were to happen, documentation is going to be evidence. And that documentation is going to be evidence for or against you. So always important to remember you can't present what you don't have. So go ahead and document. Always remember that you and your employees are integral to protecting that PII, that this is a daily task to keep in mind. Now, we want to make sure we're performing annual audits, keeping the records and documents for the appropriate amount of time and disposing of them properly as well. And then, of course, you know, we recommend to review your files, make sure that this medical information is separated, make sure that the background checks are being kept in a separate file, and that the correct people have access to this information.
All right. Thank you, Taylor and Chrissy, so much. To give you all one last chance to go ahead and enter those questions into the Q&A button as well. Alrighty, so we do have a couple questions already, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Our first question is, do I need to retain the I-9 verification identification documents with the I-9?
So I'll take that one. Yes, you do. So it's best practice to make sure that you ensure that all of your I-9s are kept identical to each other. You don't want to run into an issue where you're keeping them, you know, you have a few that are held this way and a few that are held that way. Make sure that you have all the documentation together. And again, we can't stress this enough. Make sure those I-9s are separated from the rest of the personnel file in their own secure folder or cabinet and drawer.
Nope, you're muted, friend.
So sorry. Our second one is I've always kept the employees' items all together. Do I really have to separate them out?
I'll take that one again. So with that one, you really do. You know, we've mentioned it numerous times during this, is that you really need to keep all of that information separate. Go through, do an audit of your personnel files. Go through and do an audit of people who are terminated as well, because as we have mentioned, that information can get used against you if you do not have all of them separated. Sounds like a daunting task, but it would definitely benefit your company that you go through all of those files, you separate them all out, whether you have them in hard copy or you have them electronically. Go through, separate them out, and make sure you follow the proper protocol. Because if you are audited for any reason, the Department of Labor comes in, you don't want to get into a situation where you're handing off a personnel file and come to find out you have medical information in there and I-9s in there and stuff like that. So make sure you do separate them out.
Awesome. Thank you, Chrissy. Our next one is, if my broker wants a consensus, should I encrypt it?
Yes, I'll take that one. And I think this is kind of the category in which we're most familiar with encrypted emails, is working with our benefits team, perhaps with our brokers. You know, we get those emails where you have to sign in order to access it. So it's always best, you know, you can always request that they send you that encrypted email so that you can respond and that information is sent, because yeah, there's so much information on those benefit census forms. You know, you have socials, you have medical information. Pretty much everything that we've said is protected is going to be on that form. And your family's information as well. So it even goes beyond employees. So, you know, it exponentially goes up from there. So very important, especially in those cases. Good point.
Awesome, thank you. And I believe this is our last question for right now. If we didn't get to your question, a member of our team will follow up with you after this. So our fourth question is there an audit process that I can use to ensure all forms are correct?
And I'll go ahead and take this one. So yeah, definitely there's an audit process. You know, when we take on new clients, that's the first thing we do is an HR audit. So we could always help you with that information, but also if you're talking just I-9s in particular, you can go to the USCIS. And they walk you through exactly how to fill it out correctly. So it goes one by one there. If that's something that you want to take on yourself, or you could always, you know, reach out. Because again, we are going to have some supplemental materials made available to you today, and it's a checklist, just, you know, so that you can go through and easily look and highlight what goes where, and something that you could share with, you know, everyone at the office as well.
Awesome, thank you. I think that was our last question for right now.
All right. Well, and we just wanted to go ahead and let everyone know as well. You'll see the badge in the center here. This presentation today has been certified by HRCI. You can get 0.75 credits today. Feel free to reach out to me at the email on the screen. And we would be happy to get that information to you, because we are very proud to work with HRCI and provide these credits to everyone else. And again, we're just looking to give back and help to the community. Our next webinar is going to be interview best practices. So I know this is something that touches all industries everywhere. And so it's a good way just to kind of review, make sure we're asking the right questions in the right way. And I think that's all we got for you today. Appreciate everyone being here, and have a lovely day.
Thank you, you too. Bye, everybody.